Okay, so on the 23rd of February, the brand new Pele documentary is coming to Netflix. David Tryhorn and Ben Nicholas directed it, and I'm delighted to say they are with us now. Gentlemen, you're very welcome to the show. Congratulations on the brilliant documentary.
Thank
David,
you.
we might start with you because this is a documentary that is about a hell of a lot more than just Pele, the footballer. However, one of the first things that struck me while watching this was I have absolutely not seen enough of Pele, the footballer, and if nothing else, reminding the world of one of its true great sports people is an important thing to do.
I think it was actually one of the first discussions when we talked about making this film, where we Ben and I chatted to each other and said, Pele, it's been done. Everyone knows the story, and then you dig a little bit deeper, and you realise we all actually have this very superficial knowledge of the Pele story. We haven't really been able to do it justice. It hasn't had the treatment it deserves. Perhaps we haven't seen these wonderful archival moments, but I think more crucially, we haven't seen it in context. We haven't seen how he helped build the identity of his country pre-58. No one talked about Brazil as the country of football. Post-70, Brazil is the country of football, and that's largely thanks to Pele. And I think that was probably the driving force behind it. Was exactly what you said. Here's a guy where we all think we know the story, and yet we don't. So let's actually show that. Let's contextualize it, and let's humanize him. Let's see him in a different light than perhaps we're used to seeing him in.
I guess contextually, when it comes to the footballer, Ben, it's important to show things like the 1966 World Cup. It's probably more important to show that than the 1970 World Cup, because for a genius to exist in a world where everybody wants to kick you, that's not easy.
No, and it's something we've spoken about quite a lot. That he's someone we never wanted to get into a comparison piece with other players or other periods, but in working on the film, it's crazy. His ability to turn up in big moments is, I think, unparalleled, unmatched with any other player. And as you say, in '66, he's got this strange way of not only turning up but creating moments that stay with you, that you can cling on to. So even in '66, when he gets injured, he manages to get injured in an iconic way, so that imagery becomes part of this kind of mythical thing that he's able to create throughout his career. And it's crazy how relentlessly he is in creating moments like that.
You say you don't want to get into comparisons with other players, and I'm really loath to do that. However, when we think about Pele and we think about what's happened over the course of just the last month, the conversation around his legacy is a really interesting one. So obviously we had Lionel Messi breaking his record in December, and then Santos coming back and saying, no, you did not break Pele's record. And there is this strange tone, I find anyway, when it comes to conversations around Pele, where there is a lack of maybe appreciation for him, given how maybe pernickety Santos might be in that certain moment, and maybe a lack of appreciation for truly how great he was, which I guess is going to be helped by people looking back at this footage that we see in this documentary. I'm not sure, is that something that struck you, Dave, for example, over the last month or so when this story has been developing?
I think he can get dismissed a little too readily. And unfortunately, every time Pele does get interviewed, he is always asked those comparison questions. And so he will always be drawn into the conversation. And then what's often, I think, sometimes perceived as chippiness, I think, is actually, it's his immense pride in what he managed to do, what he managed to achieve, and what he did for the country. He's an extremely proud Brazilian, and extremely proud of his achievements. And, when we initially spoke to him about this film, establishing his legacy was one of the key things. As you said, we avoid those comparison points because I think it doesn't make sense to compare eras, and it's not really worth our time. But at the same time, I think one of the things we did say is that, players might end up being better than him. Messi could be better, Cristiano Ronaldo could be better. What they can't do is do what he did. He's the first, really. They can't follow in those footsteps. He's Elvis, he's Neil Armstrong. He's the first guy to actually do it. So I think, that pioneering element to Pele is impossible to replicate.
Without question, I'd imagine that's definitely the case. And just one last point, almost on the comparisons that I sometimes find them so hard to avoid. Not just with the Messi thing over the course of the last month, but if you go back a month or two previous, when you have the death of Maradona, Ben, I'm sure that's something that almost solidifies Pele's legacy even more. The fact that so many people were coming out and comparing Maradona to Pele after Maradona's death. I'm not sure if it's an insecurity in those that support Maradona in that eternal debate, or where that comes from.
I guess it's just human nature to want to compare these guys and highlight the differences between them and the similarities. But in terms of Pele, I think we felt, he's 80 now. He's got to an age where he's feeling quite reflective, and we felt it was kind of now or never to try and help him cement his legacy, as you know, to help kind of crystallize what he did and why he's different to all the rest of these guys, you know. And like all good docs of this style, we wanted to create the feeling that you're living or reliving his story with him, so that if we can get Pele in the room and people that were with him at that time, I think we can show why his story is different, and as David says, why he is the first and why that life can never be lived again.
Was your sense that Pele was a happy man when you interviewed him?
Yeah, very. I think he's lived a good life. He has no regrets. We have to remember, you know, we time locked this film between 58 and 70 because we wanted. I think historically it was a really good period of history. It was, you know, it's kind of the birth of Pele and the birth of Brazil as a modern country at the same time, these two parallel stories. And we were getting him to try and remember things that were 50 or 60 years old. It's always quite tough. I think he comes across as very reflective in the film, which is perhaps a side of him we haven't seen before. He's usually very jovial. I think there's a very important line at the end where he talks about the relief. And I think we'd usually expect the biggest trophy you receive is actually the relief, and you'd expect Pele to be talking about happiness and joy, and we actually get him sort of going quite deep and reflecting internally. But yeah, he still lights up the room. He still has that aura about him, and I still get the feeling he's a Brazilian. He's happy in the sunshine. He likes wearing his t-shirt, shorts, and flip flops, and he's having a good time still.
I think the fact that he is so normal is one of the craziest things in a way. I think that maybe comes back to this idea that what he does for Brazil is so profound a number of times through his life that he is somehow able to create this kind of Pele character that gets him through the different aspects of his life, and he's come out the other end somehow quite a happy man.
What he did for Brazil is a really interesting discussion point. The Mongrel Complex is something that's covered really well in the documentary. This idea, I guess, of cultural inferiority that Brazilians had, and I'm kind of reluctant to use that in the past tense. If we do go back to where that perhaps came from, first of all, Ben, this essentially starts when Uruguay beat them in 1950, right? The Mongrel Complex.
They beat them in a final. They were kind of almost presumed to win to a crazy extent, and it's the kind of definitive disaster of Brazilian history, really, in a weird way. So it's a country that up until then and especially after then is riddled with self-doubt. So when Pele arrives on the scene in 58 and says, you know what, forget what happened before, give me the ball, I'm gonna take care of this. As I said, it's such a profound moment that he instantly attains this mythical status. He's been called the king at 17 years of age. He's a symbol of a new Brazil. So what we quite liked was this idea that after that, his life kind of syncs up with Brazil. So when he's feeling good, Brazil's feeling good, and vice versa. And it was kind of the task was how we can tie them together so that by the time we get to 70, there's a question in the air about, can Pele get it back? Can Brazil get it back? Can they remember what they did in 58, what it represented, and can they bring that back and show what it means to the people and remind the people what Brazil is all about?
And it's a rubber stamp on the legacy, basically. If Pele doesn't win 70, if Brazil don't win 70, then Pele doesn't become Pele. He doesn't become that immortal sort of myth that we've come to recognise. Brazil doesn't become the country of football, perhaps, that we will see it as today. So I think that was the crucial thing of the climax of 70 is, without this, everything from cultural national identity starts to disappear.
Mm.
How much did Pele actually go to getting rid completely of the Mongrel Complex? It does seem that this came up again in 2014 when they hosted the World Cup and they had their disaster against Germany, that it felt that sense of national inferiority was very much in vogue to talk about at that time. So I guess Pele helped to keep that beast down for a little while rather than completely eradicate it.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I think the 7-1 is in Brazil likened to the defeat against Uruguay in 1950. But I think what Pele did was create the notion of Brazil can be successful. Brazil can be a great success, and Brazil can be the best, and they can be better than the Europeans and all the rest of it. And I think that's always a source of pride for Brazilians, to be better than the Europeans, and that's what World Cups can represent. You know, it's not, they can win the Copa America, that's fine, but winning the World Cup is far more important. So that pressure is always going to be there. I don't think Pele necessarily eradicated the Mongrel Complex completely, but he did certainly create a nation of success that believes in its own success. So when Brazil do fail, I think in current tournaments, it's less about this thing of can we ever do it? Can we ever be that country? It's much more about replicating, I guess, the great eras of the past.
Yeah, and he, as we said, he's someone who just does it time and time again. You know, we don't have time to get into it too much in the film, but in the '62 Club World Cup final, Santos against Benfica, that is South American football trying to show European football who's the boss now. It's a 2-leg final. Pelé scores twice in the first leg and a hat-trick in the second leg. You know, you don't get much more definitive than that. He's able to just cast away all their doubts and just smash down the door.
I must say one of the most remarkable moments in it, and it comes up a couple of times, is when he's sitting with his shoe shining stand and playing the drums on it. Basically, I'm sure everybody who watches it is going to come away really affected by that. Is that his? Is that his own shoe shining stand that he's kept for a long time, or where did that idea come from to actually bring that into the film?
His own one's in his own museum in Santos, but it's a replica of that. And we actually, it was something we did on our very first shoot with him, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We saw so representative of again, once these figures attain a certain fame and a certain myth to them, we do forget where they came from. And I think by showing him sort of just playing the Brazilian beat on that shoebox, we don't need to say anything more. We know instantly, we recognize instantly his humble upbringing. This is a guy who came from a very poor background in what was essentially a third world country at the time to become one of the most famous men on the planet and perhaps one of the only surviving icons of the 20th century. And I think it's just a reminder of kind of the roots of Pelé, that ultimately this is a guy who he's Brazilian, he's black, he's come from a poor background. He probably had everything was designed for him to probably fail in life, and yet at the heart, and yet he succeeded where so many others didn't. But yet at the heart of it, he is still that guy.
It's funny, yeah. We definitely had a version or a few versions of the ending where we had him kind of trying to sum everything up, and I've got no regrets, and all the wins, all the losses, blah blah blah. But in the end, we decided just seeing him with the shoebox speaks so much louder to where he's come from and what he managed to achieve and how amazing that all is.
Yeah, it was brilliant. Really, really brilliant way to end it. Just one point on the people that you spoke to about Pelé, his former teammates, those that knew him so well. When it comes to Pelé's politics, are they by and large very forgiving of how apolitical he was in an unbelievably turbulent time for Brazil as a country?
I don't necessarily think forgiving, because I think, we actually have journalists and players leveling those criticisms at him. And, Pelé is a human, he's flawed like the rest of us. And it was our duty as filmmakers and journalists to, explore those flaws and put those questions to him. I think there were a couple of things that was important to remember. It's, he was 23 when the military dictatorship came in 1964. We always regard him as an absolute veteran of the game by 70, but he's still only 29. And I think the main thing with Pelé is that he came through in the 1950s. He, as Ben and I have often said, he's like a star of the sort of Hollywood studio system. He's an old-fashioned star. He's about magnetism. He's about smiling at the cameras. He's a sort of magazine cover, and that works perfectly in the early years, in the rise. And I don't think he ever quite catches up when the 60s become a bit more radical. I don't think he ever quite catches up to the extent that he should be making a stand. He should be standing for something. And we can't speak for him, and we can't necessarily label that as a criticism, say that he should be radical. No other players were standing up. No other players were going out against the Brazilian regime. So yeah, I think people are happy to criticise, and it is probably one of the main criticisms levelled at Pelé, that he is apolitical, or he is a little bit establishment. But it is something we definitely wanted to approach in the film and let the viewer kind of make up their mind as much as anything.
I think it's a bit of, as Dave said, he was such a 50s guy, and that worked so well. And what people wanted from a star at that time, he was able to deliver week after week in just an unbelievable fashion. When what the public started to want from a star became slightly different in 64, and around the world, people like Muhammad Ali started coming around. So it's not so much that Pelé changes; it's what the public require from their stars maybe slightly shifts, and then he is suddenly out of step for the first time. So he obviously, at some point, for better or worse, rightly or wrongly, makes a decision to stick with the plan, stick with the program. I'm going to keep on going how I've been, but maybe he's caught out a bit there because of that.
I think it's well communicated in the piece as well that Ali and Pelé are essentially in two different setups as well. The fact that one is a dictatorship, one's not. Not everybody's going to become Muhammad Ali, and that is probably the outlier, and it is very unfair to judge him by that. One final point then on this. Has Pelé seen it? Is he happy with it? Does he like the sense of legacy that this is probably going to bring in a few new eyeballs on his career?
We have no idea.
Right.
I think we've asked his, he has a very small kind of team of people around him, and we've talked to them, and I think we said that I think they were struggling with the technology or something, which sounds right. I think Pelé would be happy for us to say he's not the most technologically sound person. But yeah, we still don't. I know he's watched the trailer, and I know he's watched little bits, and from what we've been fed back, everything's been positive. But we don't actually know if he's watched the film yet or what he thinks of it. Hopefully, he likes it.
I think he will. It's brilliant. It's out on the 23rd of February. It's called Pelé, and you'll be able to get it on Netflix. David Tryhorn and Ben Nicholas directed it, and you've been listening to them for the last 15 minutes or so. Gentlemen, thanks very much.